Good afternoon and a very warm welcome. My name is Chris Burr and I'm based at St Padans as the tutor in ministerial development. I'm part of the CMD team there, and helping me run the webinar this afternoon are two of my colleagues, Veronica Cottam and Jennifer Riggs. There you go, Veronica Cottam and Jennifer Riggs. There are just 46 days to go to Christmas and only 20 days left until Advent. And we know that for many of us in ministry, this key season is going to look and feel very different this year, both for us and for our churches. So to try and help us explore the challenges and opportunities, we are holding two webinars. The first today is entitled Christmas in Your Community, Bringing Comfort and Joy. And for this, we welcome back our very good friend, Reverend Canon Dr. Sandra Millar, head of the Life Events team for the Church of England. This will be followed by a second webinar, which takes place next 16th at the same time, entitled Christmas Reimagined. And I'll explain a little bit more about that later. Now, I appreciate that for many of you, you'll have attended one of these webinars before, but please bear with me as I run through the format for any that are joining us for the first time today. So today, Sandra will speak for about 45 minutes or so, and that will be followed by a period of up to 30 minutes, which we've set aside at the end for questions and for further discussion. Please don't worry unnecessarily about dogs, children, telephones, or the Amazon delivery. Other than contributors and facilitators, you will automatically be muted for the duration of the webinar. If you have a question for Sandra, please could you post that as we go along via the Q&A function on the toolbar at the bottom of your screen. And we'll use as many of these as we're able in the Q&As at the end. You may not be able to answer all of them, but we'll do our best with the time that we have. And you can choose to do this anonymously if you prefer. Alternately, you want to share a comment with the rest of the attendees, or if Sandra asks you to share anything as she goes along, then please use the chat facility for these. Don't panic if your toolbar disappears. It fades out if it's inactive. To bring it back, just move your mouse, touch the mouse pad, your screen, depending on what equipment you're using. And don't worry if you miss anything today. This webinar is being recorded and will be available to view via St Padans website. And our aim is to make that available to view within the next couple of days. And finally, you'll automatically receive a feedback request via email in the next day or so. It's very short and very straightforward. If you could take a moment to do that, we'd be extremely grateful. Now, there are 98 registered for our webinar today. So hopefully you'll appreciate why we can't make this any more interactive than we're able to. So it's not possible for you to put your own questions as we go along. It's a webinar and not a Zoom meeting, which means that only the contributors will be able to appear on screen at any one time. I'll be back later to help facilitate the questions and answers, but for now, I'm delighted to introduce our speaker for today. As I said, a good friend of the Church in Wales, Reverend Canon Dr. Sandra Millar. Sandra, really good to have you back with us this afternoon.
Good to be here. I shall now share my screen again, because I think you shared your screen and pushed mine out, Chris, you know. But now I'm back, so that's good. Well, it's great to be with you. Do you mind if I say a little prayer as we begin? Is that all right? Can I do that? I shall now say a prayer and then we'll begin. Loving God, we thank you for the great truth that we prepare to celebrate, that you came as light into our darkness, as life into our despair, as hope when we feel that there is no hope. Help us now to listen well, to think well, to have the gifts that are within us kindled by your Holy Spirit as we plan again to share the good news of God with us, Emmanuel, this Christmas time. Amen. Okay, well, as I say, it's good to be with you. I'm speaking to you, as many of you may know, but not all of you. I speak to you from the other country, over the border. I'm not too far away, actually. I'm can wave at you across the Bristol Channel if you're in South Wales. In the time I'm based in Gloucester, so relatively close. We have some shared county borders, at least, anyway. And it's always a delight to come and share with you in Wales some of the things that we've been thinking about. And I hope that many of these things will help you, just as they help some of our parishes and churches throughout England. So the talk, as you've heard, I'm the way I've been thinking at the moment is about framing memories. So I hope you enjoy some of the photos on the way through as well. What I'm going to have to try and cover this in this time is a little bit about where we are now, a bit about what welcome means and why Christmas is so important for us as a church. Some frameworks for how we can work around Christmas, which will help us to shape what we're doing, and just ask ourselves some questions about where different things might fit in, what we can do, focus on that, the importance of communicating what we do, telling people what's happening, and of course, as Chris has already said, that question session, and just keep putting them in any time during the presentation. What I hope during this time that we have together is that what we will do is bring some sense of reassurance that it's okay to be where we are, and that it's okay that we'll be able to do a good job in this. And part of that is affirming you in the work that you've been doing, because like all our churches across all our countries, our clergy, our lay people have just been so fantastic in drawing on skills that some of us didn't know we could even access, learning from one another, stirring up gifts that we've had, using them in new ways, continuing to do the things that God has called us to do right there in our communities. So it's a fantastic thing. And really to have that confidence in who we are, wherever we are, confidence above all in the good news of God's love revealed in Jesus. And never was there a better time to be focused on that than as we go through Advent and to Christmas, that central message that we have, that in the midst of our world comes the Christ child, God with us. And our confidence is not just based on the resources that our national churches provide to us, or the resources we can create locally, whether we're good at Zoom or not, but our confidence is based on that, the fact that we have good news to share. So I really hope that that will underpin everything that we do, that we hold on to that and grow in confidence through that. But the two other phrases that I have at the bottom are what's really important at this time. I talk a lot at the moment about the art of the possible. And I quite like using the word art at this point, because I like art, and I particularly like contemporary art. And of course, art is often takes time to put things together. Some people think some bits of art are good, some people don't like them. We can never please everybody with bits of art as well. They're often taking unexpected things and seeing them in a completely new way. So this is about art as much as anything, the art of what is possible. It's really easy in this season to focus on what we can't do and what's not going to happen, and the things we wish we were going to do. And I think what's really helpful to us is to frame that as, what is it that we can do? And in doing that, it's about becoming memory makers. And some of you may have heard me share this story before, but just in case you haven't, I'll repeat where this phrase memory makers came from for me. And it came from a real life event in New Zealand, my first visit to New Zealand, some considerable years ago now. And it was New Year's Day. And in New Zealand, New Year's Day is an outdoors day. And it's very common to go on family picnics, big gathered picnics. And we were at such a picnic on the South Island, where, a bit like parts of England, parts of Scotland, parts of Wales, the weather changes really quickly. So one minute, all the picnic is laid out on the ground and everybody's ready to start eating. And the next minute, from nowhere, comes this huge, heavy rainstorm, plumb down on things. And we try to throw as much as we can into the cars as quickly as we can. But obviously some things get left outside and things get squashed in the process. The storm passes over, we get out the cars. And at that point, some of the people, particularly some of our younger people, our teenagers, start moaning about the event. This is a disaster. This is terrible. This is the worst picnic ever, because things were ruined and broken. And one of the women there said, this is not a disaster. In your life, you will go to many, many New Year's Day picnics, and most of them will blur into one. But this one will stand out. This is not a disaster. This is a memory maker. And I truly believe that in this season, we have an opportunity this year to really make new memories for people, to make this Christmas have meaning in a way that it has not had perhaps for many years for people, to focus on some really new and core things that become special. And we'll talk about why that might be as well. So I hope by the end of this time, we'll have some idea of what that might mean for us as churches. Importantly for me, although we probably, lots of us were listening, maybe ordained, some of us may not, we might have different roles, recognised in the church, all sorts of people. And for me, all this that we're doing is really important to remember that this is everyone's ministry. This work that we're going to do, this proclaiming the good news of God's love in Jesus, this sharing worship with people at Christmas is built on everyone's strengths and everyone's gift, everyone's vocation and calling. For some of us, it has been our vocation. That's what's motivated us to share the good news of God's love, to be there and to worship with people at Christmas. And yes, we've got much experience to draw from. And it's really important as well at the moment to draw from experience that people have in other contexts. And I will touch on that as well. Many of us may have had years of experience doing things in the church the same way. We know what Christmas is. We do the same thing. But we may be relatively new to ministry. We may be drawing on experience from other contexts. Some of you may know or may not know that my background before I was ordained 20 years ago, my background is actually in retail marketing. That was my professional world. And actually, I draw on a lot of experience from that world to help shape the way we communicate now in the church. And around our congregations, around our communities, there will be experiences that are just there for us to draw on right now. Of course, we have training and input that helps us, and we have that great heritage of being God's people in our communities, buildings, witness that stands the test of time. And as I've said already, we have the gospel to draw on, and everyone can be part of this process as we go forward. So thinking about where we are right now, I've got to begin with this statement because I don't know about you, but I have variously got extremely cross with lots of our media over the last few weeks with this statement that Christmas is cancelled. You know, I'm yelling at the telly here. Christmas is not cancelled and can never be cancelled. Of course it can't, because what we're doing is celebrating this incredibly significant event. However, the context in which we celebrate and mark it may well have changed. Now, of course, you will notice if you're observant, and you can actually see the photo at the bottom, that the Little Father Christmas on my Advent calendar is placed in the number 9. You may want to be thinking that I specially chose this because today is the 9th of November and you in Wales are beginning a different phase of this COVID pandemic from the phase we are entering in England. I have to break it to you that it's extremely coincidental that it's got the number 9 on it. It's a photo I took of my own Advent calendar a couple of years ago. And the reason it's number 9 is because my birthday happens to be on the 9th of the particular month. So the 9th hasn't got any dramatic significance. Just to remind us that we're in a different context, it's helpful. You are in the context for now of some things waking up again. You may be able to feel that some things can happen in a way that it didn't feel like even a couple of weeks ago. But on the other hand, there is this caution. I was listening to your First Minister just this lunchtime, and I thought it's very sensible to say it's not about doing the maximum we can do, it's still about doing the minimum we can do. And when we think about that in the context of Christmas, thinking about the things we need to balance is going to be really, really important. What's also important is that we maintain as churches that deep, deep sense of wanting to welcome people, that we approach this with joy. Comfort and Joy is the name of the Church of England's National Christmas campaign. And one of the things I talk about quite a lot is the need to be delighted in seeing people, the need to reflect that joy and excitement about Christmas, that there are really happy things about Christmas, even if it's different. And that if people are wanting to come to us, even if it's difficult, we need to be delighted that they even have that intent to want to do something at Christmas. But of course, we've got to balance all of that with making sure that we do it safely and we do it in line with our national guidance that comes through our governments and comes through our church and so on. So we do things in a way that makes people feel safe, as well as making them feel, warm and welcome and included. Communication of what we're doing is going to be massively important this year, and we'll touch on that again later, to help people properly understand just what it is we're doing, what we can do and what we can't do. I don't know what it's been like for you in Wales, but one of the difficulties we've discovered in the Church of England is that languages that we use are understood differently by different groups of people. So we boldly thought that when we said the church is closed, but it's not closed because the church is the people, that everyone knew what that meant. But what we've come to realize is that that understanding that the church is the people is an insider understanding. You only get to that point of thinking the church is the people once you belong. For those who are outside the church, the message is easily understood: the church is closed. So we have to work very, very hard at communicating what it is that we are open to do and how people can access us in different ways, rather than assuming they know what it is that we do and who we are and what we offer. Equally, we have to manage people's expectations, and we will say some more about that. But I think a positive note on expectations right now, and I'm sure you've begun to experience this, it is not odd that we are doing things like limiting numbers. It is not odd that we're asking people to wear masks. It's not odd that we have hand sanitizers out. Every other organisation in every sector of our society is having to do the same things. What would be odd right now if we were going into this season with no change and trying to do it the same as it was last year? Everyone is expecting us to be different. That's the responsible thing to do. That's what's happening throughout our culture. So it's kind of part of the big story in our nations at the moment. And also, in a way, harking back to the memory making thing, is the language that we need to watch that we use. Different is not worse. And sometimes without realizing it, we begin to suggest that. It was very interesting yesterday on Remembrance Sunday, talking to some people. For many people yesterday, Remembrance Sunday was marked because they were watching at home on the cenotaph. I did that for a large part of the morning. That was not worse than it would have been. It was different, but actually that's a valid thing to have done as well. So sometimes we need to help people to understand that what they're doing that's different doesn't mean it's inferior. Of course, sometimes it may feel inferior, and we have to speak into that as well, where people are disappointed, especially perhaps when they can't gather with people they would want to be with. So sometimes it's disappointing, but it isn't automatically going to be inferior. So Christmas is not cancelled. Hooray, good news for all of us. Why does Christmas matter to us so much as a church? Does it matter so much to us as nations? Of course, even our very calendar is dated from Christmas, and it matters enormously to our society. It matters financially, economically, matters personally. But I think for us as churches, it matters for some different reasons as well. One of the most amazing things for us, incredibly, in a secular society, is that the Christmas story is still a touch point for tens of thousands of people. People who will not otherwise have touched anything to do with the story will touch the Christmas story as part of the Christian gospel. So it's a hugely important moment for us in our reach into culture with the good news of God's love. Also, this story that's at the heart of Christmas, the reason for the season, we might say, this story is what gives meaning to all the other things that go on. Now, we've seen a massive growth in the last decades towards a hugely commercial Christmas, where people occasionally or massively lose sight of what is the meaning of Christmas. But this year, we have a really big opportunity to put back some of that meaning. All that's happened means people are looking for some depth. Now, they may not be looking for it in immediately obvious spiritual terms. There are other words and other actions that might take place that are echoes of the heart of God. I think it's extraordinary the ways in which God's heart and intention is being spoken into our nation at the moment. I was reflecting on this at the weekend when I was thinking about the extraordinary words that come out of the mouth of Captain Tom, the voice of this year. This man is 100 years old and he speaks positive, hopeful, encouraging words. And I found myself just wondering, although he's not, as far as any of us have been aware, he's not a known follower of the Christian way, unlike Harry Billings, who's another older man who talks of faith very openly. Captain Tom doesn't talk about faith, and yet he gives meaning to things. He shares some really positive things. And there are those words that are being spoken where people are searching for real meaning, but they might express them by talking about the need to find some love at Christmas, which is why I've put the phrase sharing virtues. There are some virtues around in our society at the moment that are echoes of the heart of God at work in our world. Kindness, blessing people is part of what happens at Christmas, and helping people to understand that in our generosity and our giving, we are echoing the heart of God is a real way of capturing and speaking into that. In our desire to be together with family and friends, we're speaking about love. And perhaps in our desire to give to those who will be alone or those who will be struggling financially this Christmas, again, we're doing those virtuous things that we can begin to speak into and amplify as stories of the kingdom of God at work, even when, to begin with, people don't know that they're part of the kingdom of God. And Christmas is massively bringing hope to people. I was reflecting this weekend with some people about the difference that Christmas means for us in the Northern Hemisphere compared with those who live in the Southern Hemisphere. One of the things is that our symbolism of Christmas is massively about light in the darkness, about company in the long dark nights of winter. It's like these 12 days traditionally of Christmas from the 25th to the 6th of January came always at the point where the year had gone to its darkest, its coldest, its most closed inward. And that desire to be together with people is part of hanging on to the hope at that time of year. We were talking about festivals like in Sweden when they have Santa Lucia and everyone marches around with candles on their heads. And it's about coming together to celebrate light in the darkness. So Christmas and the desire to be together is about hope. And we have such a huge message of hope, whether it's comfort and joy or light in the darkness. That is so much our message this year. And as I've said a number of times, this is the heart of the gospel. This is what we are bearing witness to at this season. So how we meet people and what we do with them will matter tremendously at this time. And we will, of course, be encountering people on their faith journey at all sorts of different stages in all kinds of different places. Some people we will be encountering just digitally. And that's been one of the most exciting things that's been happening this year with Zoom church and live streaming and so on, is people growing on their faith journey through those digital means. But you may also, as we'll hear, be contacting and meeting people wherever they happen. It'll be in some physical spaces as well. They, of course, could be completely new to faith, never having really touched the story at all before, or they might just be at a different point on their faith journey, new to you, discovering you as your expression of God's people in your place. And they might be coming for a worship event or some other kind of event, as we'll hear. And I would say, as you enter into planning what you're doing at Christmas, just put yourself in the shoes of those you want to meet and speak to, particularly those who may be fringe to church. What does all this feel like to them? And notice that good and bad practice that's happening in other organisations. Keep your eyes and ears open to how other organisations are communicating, how they're reaching out, what their messaging is. For example, I'm really struck by how a lot of our banks are communicating at the moment with this very strong message: we're wherever you find it easiest to be. It's not right or wrong whether you need to come in a branch or meet us on Zoom or have a phone call. All of those are valid ways of meeting us. To me, that feels like quite a good message and one that we could echo as well. There's not a hierarchy of it's much better if you get online, or it's much better if we could be in a building. All of them are ways in which we can meet God and God's people. So notice what's going on. It's really important to keep an eye on that at the moment, and think about whatever you're doing feels like for those who are new, especially to church. Who might we be meeting at Christmas? This is by no means an exhaustive list. You can think of probably many other groups that you want to put in this as well. But I think some groups that might be significant this year. We will, of course, all have what I call our regulars. These are the people who we worship with all year round, who maybe come every week or several times a month, whatever it is, the regulars that we know. How do we meet their needs? But then there's a fascinating group at Christmas that I'm going to call the irregular regulars. I remember being really challenged on this one year when I met a baptism family, and I was talking to them about why they wanted their child baptized and one thing and another. And she looked at me and she said, well, why do we go to church? And I'd never seen them at our church at all. And I said, oh, really? And she said, yeah, we go to the cathedral and I help at the cathedral. Never seen them at the cathedral. And believe me, a family with a child would stand out. We'd notice them. So I was like, oh, really? And she said, yeah, we go every year to the nativity service. And it's easy for us as insiders to kind of face a smile at that. Oh, well, but actually there are some irregular regulars, the people for whom what we do at Christmas is actually a still point in their turning world. So what are we doing to meet their needs this year? And then many of us will have partner organisations, the ones we work with every year at Christmas, who hold their carol services in our church or with us. How do we meet with them this year? And then there might be some new people that we may or may not have worked with in the past. One of the ones I've missed off here, of course, is schools, I realise. Schools and partnerships we have with them. But care homes this year, it might be really important to reach to care homes in new and different ways this year. We know there's all kinds of things we could do, and I'll throw out some ideas about that, how we contact them and how we support them. But other groups that are really important this year, how are we going to reach and support and share the good news of hope with those who are bereaved in our communities, whether or not we've been involved in the funerals? It's a hard year for the bereaved, whatever the cause of their bereavement, and indeed whether it's this year, last year or 5 years ago, it's hard. Another group I've realised that it's quite hard for is actually what I'm calling new family groups. This is where a child has arrived this year, a baby has been born, or a child has come into a family. There's a reason why there's a lot of stuff out there called Baby's First Christmas. It's because it's a really special time for people. They love that sense of being family, echoing the family in the stable. And many families have had a really hard time over birth, over early months with the child, alone, not having had family support. So are there new family groups that we want to think about this year in a special way? And another group is those who are alone for Christmas. Now, do forgive me if I speak with some passion about this, because I am in that category. But please don't assume that everyone who will be alone on Christmas Day is somehow in need of a food parcel or in need of, I don't know, just, consolation. Actually, we may just need a bit of company at some point, or to be remembered when we talk about things, and use our language that doesn't assume that every single person is gathered on Christmas Day. It doesn't mean that no one loves you either. It just means this year, for practical, sensible reason, you choose not to go and travel to be with others. So have a little think about those as well. Of course, some people are alone and very vulnerable, and we need to think about them as well. On that, can I just put a little plea in here? If you know anyone at all who is living alone, or you're just coming out of lockdown, so it's maybe a bit easier, but please make sure you try and speak to them at some point, not just send them messages or emails, but speak to them, because one of the hardest things can be not having heard another human voice for some considerable period of time. So one of the things we're looking at in all this time, meeting people at Christmas, our ultimate goal, because we're mission and evangelism and sharing the good news, is that people discover friendship, that they discover that they have a place in God's heart and a place with God's people. the words of the text we heard yesterday, Jesus calls us friends. And yet we know that people begin their contact with church, whatever time of year it is, with fear and anxiety. And that is heightened at the moment for all sorts of reasons. We need really to give people good practical information that reassures them. But we need to help them look forward to being with us as well, so that they get to this place of feeling delighted at Christmas that church is part of the mix. So let's move on a little bit. We're keeping focused on Christmas. I'm going to throw some practical ideas out soon. But before I do that, you might think it's a very strange place to have jumped past Christmas and raised the question of Boxing Day and beyond. We're really good at making this sort of reach or tangential contact around Christmas. Many people walking through, we may be feeling quite, pleased with the fact that we've got lots of people watching our services on Zoom or live streaming. But the challenge is how are those people going to journey on after Christmas Day? You may actually be doing something quite nice on Christmas Day, but the rest of that holiday time could be really, really horrible. So let's not just think about what we're doing on Christmas Day, but maybe also how we're going to do some things after that. And one of the big questions in my work around welcome, I'm encouraging churches to think about, is if you are having contact with new people, the question is not when will they come to church again, but at a risk of sounding a bit like I'm running a dating website, when will you see each other again? When's the next opportunity? And who's going to make sure that happens? Some really good practice digitally is to make sure you've got people who are specifically in your Zoom meeting or your live streaming, whose job is to watch who's coming in and just keep saying hello, just keep making contact with them. To invite them to come to church, to see if they need any practical help or can offer practical help. It's great to hear stories of people very fringe to church who are now transforming our digital output because they offer some skills. Are you going to meet them online for something? Is it going to be midweek or Sunday? Or could you have the opportunity to meet them in a real space for a coffee in the new year? So looking out for what happens after Boxing Day to help people grow in relationship is important. And everything we do when we meet people, whether digitally or physically, is doing these things of seeing people, noticing who's new, smiling in a way that reflects kindness, making a connection and inviting them on to friendship. And as part of that, I talk about the 4 I's. It's really useful to have things that begin with the same letter. This is always important. But at Christmas, how do we do this? How do people know what is happening? How do we give them good information? And how do we invite them? And another little word on language here. One of the things about the word invitation is it implies that you go somewhere. Whereas we may not be giving people an invitation to actually come into a building or a physical space. We may be actually inviting them to join us at a digital event or a special community event. So just make sure you're clear in your language, whether you're giving people information about what you're doing or whether you're inviting them and how they might understand that. Remain interested and, as I say, great opportunities for helping out. So what are we going to be doing at Christmas? We're going to have to think differently about our services as such that we would normally have done, those millions of carol services. And I'm going to talk about some different spaces, our physical spaces, both indoors and outdoors, our digital spaces and our domestic spaces. And my final thing on that is when I talk about what you do, I encourage you to think of doing just 2 things well, and maybe think of them as comfort and joy or light and darkness. What is the one thing that you might be able to offer as a church that meets people in their disappointment and sadness, if that is the case? And what is the one really good thing you do that becomes happy and delighted at Christmas as well? So thinking about those 2 aspects, keeping them in focus is really important. I'm not going to say too much in detail about digital spaces, except that digital spaces are massively important. This is anything you do. There is a difference between Zoom and live streaming or YouTube church that you do. All of those are slightly different and will have slightly different impacts. But anything you do digitally is really powerful. And one of the reasons it's particularly powerful is because it links directly to domestic space. I've been pondering this in the sense that for many years we've talked about the power of the word being proclaimed in our buildings, and the very walls are impregnated with the prayers of the people. Those prayers and readings are now being said out loud in living rooms and kitchens all over the land. That's a powerful thing. But one of the things that's really important is to make a link between the passive way of watching on screen and something that makes it real and concrete in the space that people inhabit. So as you say a prayer, is there something physically that you can do to follow it up at whatever age you are? So that might be as you listen to a prayer. So yesterday on Remembrance, you are holding the poppy. At Christmas, you may be looking or doing something at the tree. You know, there could be different things that we can think of. Another powerful thing is the important thing of doing things at the same time. We've really kind of seen the power of this in these last few months. We've always known this is the case, as evidence with Remembrance. The 2-minute silence at 11 o'clock is a powerful shared moment. How can we capture some of that this year? So, for example, one of the moments I'm going to suggest is, we know many of us, our biggest services are crib or nativity services, which you won't be able to have a cast of thousands present. But why not suggest that at the 4 o'clock on Christmas Eve moment, when you place the Christ child in the crib, invite all your families to be doing that in their own homes at the same time, and then sharing the videos of that happening, so that we all do the same thing at the same time. Or even before that, why not choose a star on the tree moment? Let's all say a prayer as the star goes on the tree and share that prayer with each other, so we amplify what's going on. And don't forget the post. Physical things in the post are really important to people. Care homes, why not get people working together to make cards to send to those who work and those who live in our care homes, so that all get some message this Christmas. These are all ideas. You will have many others as to what can work where you are. So as well as those domestic spaces, now I started with those because I think it's really important now that we see that as an incredible opportunity. Many of us have talked for a long time about how do we take faith out of the church into people's lives? Is faith something that only happens on a Sunday in the building? Well, now it's not. It's moved into people's homes in many cases. This Christmas, it can move into even more homes. But also there's a lot we can do with our outdoor spaces. And this is both our own church outdoor spaces, if we've got some, and just our community space as well. Many people have already begun to think like this. Where can we create a prayer space? It's been marvellous to see pictures this weekend of churches who've been putting stone crosses, poppy crosses, all sorts of things outside their churches or in their community that have allowed everyone to come and place some memories. How would we replicate that for Christmas? Maybe we have the space, a star shape in our churchyard. Maybe we make sure we have a good size outdoor crib this year, which absolutely doesn't need to be perfect. I feel it's really important that we challenge the idea that Christmas has to always be the best ever. But actually, Christmas happens in quite a broken sort of way. And maybe we put a crib out that is just a bit makeshift, and we put it outside, but it's big and people can see it. And maybe they can place some prayers into it as well. Lots of people are thinking about how to do trails around their community or hunts around the graveyard. So I know people who are developing the idea of windows in their communities for Advent, different people doing one every day, and then you film them and you share them on social media. So these things work together. Other churches are just doing that entirely on social media. The church that I work with is very much a church where people travel. It hasn't really got a community around it. So rather than trying to get people locally doing the windows, a number of people are videoing themselves, one for each day in Advent, and those little videos will be released during Advent. So people get that opportunity to trail their way through to Christmas. Others I know are doing treasure hunt type of things in the churchyards, if they've got a big churchyard, or in the village or in the community. So little angels to go and look for, or stars to go and look for, gifts to go and look for. All sorts of ways to do windows, to do walks. Maybe prayer walks would be a good, Christmas prayer walks could be good, praying for the needs of your community. And over the last few years, many people have got involved with Posada. And Posada is that way in which the Holy Family, without the Christ child, travel from place to place, and they're received into different homes. Well, that's not going to be a good plan this year. How can you do it differently? Someone posted a great picture yesterday on Facebook as they're getting ready to do their Posada, and they'd taken a picture of the Mary and Joseph figure outside a Premier Inn sign with a big sign next to it saying something about Christmas. And it was a great putting together of the different elements that communicates to people. Where will they journey this year? Will there be any room for them when they get there? So thinking imaginatively about how you can use the spaces and places in your community would be really important. And think too about how you take the story to the people. I'm not sure that this isn't one of my wilder ideas, but I'll throw it out to you anyway. I could make it sound grand by talking about medieval mystery plays, or I could link it to a secular event. Many of us have known for years how someone like, often where I lived, I think it was Lions or Round Table, used to drive around the neighbourhood as Christmas drew close with a flatbed truck with Father Christmas on the back, blaring out recorded carols. And you'd sort of know that that meant Christmas was coming and close. Why not take Mary and Joseph out on the flatbed truck this year? Why not blare out some carols in your neighbourhood and make it kind of quite light? This is what we do. This is who we are. This is the story. And you may be able to distribute gifts depending on the local guidelines at that time as well. When I say gifts, I mean tiny things like a little angel token or something like that. So taking the story to the people is really important. And of course, you can do that digitally as well. So that's outdoor spaces. Indoor spaces. Now that might be your space, or it might be working with someone else in a community space. It might be working with a school or a rugby club premises, something like that, wherever you could go. But think about the different moments that need to be offered in your indoor space. What are the moments of joy that you're going to be able to offer? And how will you offer them? They will not be the same as previous years, but there may still be moments that you can capture in the church. I know for many of us, the question will come up about singing. All of us are worried about singing. I really like singing along to our Zoom service as long as I'm muted in the house. And it's a powerful thing to remind people they can sing. And this time no one's listening. It's great. But actually, we don't know yet exactly where we'll be with singing. Can you do things that bring comfort to people? It's really important that we make spaces for people to do things where they can hold their sadness as well. And what can we do that's familiar to people? Is there one service that you can say, that's the one I'm going to focus on? Not trying to offer 20 different kinds of Christmas services, but one service, which you may want to repeat a number of times. But if your main thing is going to be the Christingles, lots of guidance how to do that, a crib service or a carol service, which of those is the thing that will touch people where you are? And bearing in mind the different audiences that you might be reaching to at that point. And some of this links into that sense of communal spaces, that these are not necessarily our spaces, but they're shared with others. Really look for local partnerships. Someone said to me when I threw out the flatbed truck idea, well, how will we get a truck? I said, I don't know, you just find a business locally that's got one and you start talking to them and you make a partnership. What are the shared moments in your community that will matter? And can you replicate them around the community? And this depends on the size and actual context each community is in. Don't be afraid to learn from others' creativity. Heard a great one recently of a church that's working in partnership with the local Amdram group to do something really different and share together this Christmas, putting online lots of different clips that the local group are doing, partnering together. And that helps people participate in the story as well, rather than just being passive observers. I think these last three things are really important. How do we balance this comfort and joy? Joy is really important at Christmas. And partly it's about being aware of the culture that we're in, the messages that are being put out there. We don't want to end up as the church having the gospel that's about being sad at Christmas. I say this a lot in the Church of England as well. We have to get this in balance, that sense of being joyful, glad, even happy about the fact that we're here and what we can do. But bringing that message of light in the darkness, of comfort, by being realistic about what's actually going on. And this will mean keeping an eye on everything that's being said and done right the way through. And hopefully, if we can, adjusting our messages as we get nearer the day, as we're aware of what's happening. And in and through this, we build moments and memories for people. The symbolic actions that we do, that we get everyone to do, that maybe they've never done that before, thought about placing the Christ child in the crib at home. Maybe they never thought about pausing and placing, turning on the lights on the tree or putting the angel or the star on the top. But this time, make it important. And I do think this year the crib and the nativity scene has got a particular power for people. It's been very interesting to see that Aldi, for example, had on sale a wooden nativity set, and it sold out really fast. At the other end of the economic scale, I was in John Lewis, and already all their Christmas crib scenes had gone. There is something there for people about wanting the real meaning. But don't forget to connect to the traditions that people expect. Enough tradition so they can find what's familiar and yet done in a new way. And don't forget, there's always a space in Christmas for silence and stillness that may create a new memory. Importantly, we need to communicate whatever we're doing with people. Tell people what we're doing, how we're doing it, and where it's happening. Now, one of the downsides of Zoom things is that you only get to know about it if someone gives you the Zoom link. The upside of that is that anyone who has the Zoom link has already made a contact. So it's a little bit of an advantage there. Think about how you're going to get information out. How do you make sure that what you communicate says this means of accessing our service is just as valid as any other means? If you're all gathering outside in a space where it's permissible, make sure you communicate that that's a good thing to be doing. Give people clear information and that suggestion that this is part of a continued relationship as we go forward as well. So, just coming to an end here by hopefully lots of questions and comments. Have some confidence that we've got an amazing message to share at Christmas. You all know that, and you're already doing a great, great job. And you can do more. We're not more. Nobody wants to do any more. We're all tired and weary, but you can do this thing. And that's why I say, look at the framework, look at which spaces you're in, the domestic space, the digital space, the indoor space, the outdoor space. Think about your audience and choose focus. If your resources are limited, whether your personal resource or your people are limited, choose to focus. Just go for that. I think I'm certainly encouraging us in the Church of England to think like this at this planning stage. Do what's possible. And right now, I think it's helpful to say anything we do that's gathered is going to be the bonus. Let's think creatively about what we can do that doesn't rely on assuming that we're all going to be gathered in church for midnight mass, because we may well not be. And remember, it's not about disappointment, but it's about delight in the good news of God's love. We are going to be memory makers for people this year, bringing the depth and meaning of Christmas in new and creative ways. The Church of England have got a share website, which absolutely anyone can access. Go to this page called Church Support Hub /Christmas 2020. And we're encouraging parishes across the land, and you can all be included as well, to share on there those practical creative ideas that you have. If you've developed a way of doing this, then share something on there as well. Lots of ideas already there that you could find useful, and use as jumping off points to develop your own ideas. So Chris, that brings me to the end of all of that, and I'll hand over to you.
Well,
stop sharing.
To say thank you very, very much. Vast amount of information, practical, thoughtful stuff in there. So I'm just going to reflect some of that back to you, Sandra, to kind of tease out a little bit. But before we do that, just to say, folks, if you've already thought about kind of reimagining Christmas, we'll talk a bit more about this next week as well, but it'd be good to share some thoughts. So just pop those in the chat room as we go along, and any questions for Sandra that pop up over the next few minutes as well. But just to address some of the questions that you've already asked, because there's some ones I'm sure that it's the same for everybody here. Right, you mentioned, Sandra, about carol services. There's a question here. Do you think that we'll be able to hold a carol service this year because we can't sing?
Well, do you know, let me just see if there's some writing on the wall, Chris, in here appearing.
Have a look,
as in we're reading the book of Daniel at the moment. I could do with a prophetic dream right now. I don't know is the answer. None of us actually know. We know, what we do know is that there's a lot of research being done all the time about singing and how it's transmitted. In the Church of England right now, we can still have choirs. If we're going to be live streaming from our churches, we can have a choir at a distance. We know that can happen. I don't know where you're at in Wales with choirs. I think everyone knows that singing carols is really good, but we do not know if we're going to be able to do that. What we do know is we will be able to listen to carols. So again, think about creatively how you can do that rather than worrying about what, we don't know yet. We really don't know. And I think it would in some ways not feel very sensible if we just had 48 hours or 7 days of sort of madness of, oh, let's all go and sing loudly in our churches and gather, only to end up in January, February in a really difficult place in our nation. There's got to be some wisdom in this about what we do. So that's why I say do what you can. Think about, it'd be lovely if we get news that we can, but let's try and think how, if we can't, are we going to make it happen? Things like a solo voice singing from outside a church can be immensely moving to people, or as I said about my flatbed truck with the carols blaring out, why think about how we can do that. Get people doing a sing along in their own home as well, because as I say, singing in home alone is very possible and quite good. Always mute everybody because otherwise it's terrible. But think of that and just keep watching and waiting and praying about the actual singing, but we really don't know at the moment.
I think that's one of the things, Sandra, isn't it? Is that we're all thinking about how can we do what we've always done, whereas actually it's a different conversation we need to have this year.
Yeah.
And it doesn't need to be, it's just different, isn't it?
It's just different. And that's kind of what I'm trying to say. It's the art of the possible. It's not how do we replicate what we've always done, but what is there something that we can do in a new way this year that makes a memory for people. And as I say, my particular example I'm using is this idea of generating on Christmas Eve a powerful community moment where, whatever time it is, and for families it's tea time, isn't it, on Christmas Eve, when you would traditionally have your crib service and you put the Christ child in the crib. Why not make families aware of that as a moment? And they may never have thought of it before, but you can do that in a different way, and share something that becomes like, gosh, and then it'll become a family tradition. Oh, do you remember the year when? Oh, that's what we do in this family. We always stop on Christmas Eve and we have a mince pie and put Jesus in the crib, whatever it might be. And that's the sign that Christmas is beginning. But we could work on those things.
Yeah, there's a good question there about schools, actually, because obviously schools is a huge part of what we do at Christmas. And of course, life is very different for schools at the moment. So, an anonymous question here. Do you think schools will want or be able to engage with us as churches this year?
I think the question is this: will schools or should schools be engaging with the Christmas story? Absolutely, yes, they should. So how do we enable that to happen in partnership with them? So rather than us imposing on a school what they've always done before, is sharing the conversation with them. How do you want the school to hear the Christmas story this year? What's your thing?
And those conversations need to start now.
They need to be happening now. How do we help you to do that this year? So whatever that might end up being, and you may have some ideas you want to take, like using the outdoor space at school. One of the most fantastic things I saw on YouTube, others of you may have seen this as well, was a wonderful little video that did the rounds of a school, and I think it was in the West Midlands somewhere, where at harvest all the children stood socially distanced outside the school with their backs to the school, praying, singing a song of blessing into their community. It was beautiful. We could suggest things like that to our schools. The place for prayer at the gate, the place that the parents can put prayers at Christmas at the school. So go with some thoughts, but work with the school. It's a time, I think it's a season for us to be humble and make partnerships rather than just say, oh, well, we always do that. You always come to church, the carol service. How do you want to do that this year? It's more like, what are you thinking as to how the children will engage with the Christmas story this year? And how can we work together to make that happen?
The traditional model at Christmas, isn't it, is that it's the time of year where all the community comes to us. Actually, this year, it's a brilliant opportunity for us to just do it.
And to draw on some of those skills that are out there as well. And so that's why I shared the story about the church that was working with the Amdram group, to do something different. They just said, well, we haven't got enough people in our church to go and act out little scenes from the nativity, but you all love acting. Let's do that. And it's partnership then, rather than you know, rather than us saying, oh, we know what to do, come and join us. I think, you know, obviously in large parts of Wales, you're going to have really important places to do with the rugby club. You know, go and talk to them, and what's possible. Could you go and take Mary and Joseph in the middle of the pitch, you know, and take some pictures of them right there? You have to think differently about these things and say, how are we going to bring the message of hope to all your people this year together?
And the next question, you've pretty much addressed there, Sandra. It says in terms of taking the story out to people.
Yeah.
Have any advice on how we could work alongside other denominations to make it a community effort?
Yeah, and I think it's the same thing when I talk about partnerships. This has never been a better time than for us to go and talk to our fellow Christians, you know, fellow community leaders, and say, what is it that together we could do that would make an impact, rather than us dissipating into our buildings. To say, for example, care homes would be a great one to think about. I've been talking about this with parish Stratford-on-Avon, that's where it was, where basically you work out they've got whatever number of care homes in their community, and they're starting to get the regular congregations creating cards that will be gathered and delivered to all the care homes from all the churches. So everybody's working on it. Not this is the church in Wales, this is the church in England, this is the Methodists and so on, but this is the Christian story at Christmas shared into our care homes. So definitely all these conversations need to be starting now, and it's sort of, how can we do this together, meet this particular need? Now, a lot of places are doing this through food banks already, working together. So it's having those conversations and what else is it that we can do. We've got a project happening here in Gloucester in the city at Christmas, where meals, Christmas dinner is, lots of parish members suggest people, Christmas dinners are being offered free to people in need this Christmas. So, you know, and everyone's working on that, all the churches. So it's a really different way of doing it. Yeah. And I think, for example, on the food bank one of the things that's often struck me is we're very good at organising, you know, basic foods and supplies. One of the amazing things about Christmas is the generous prodigality of God's love, the sort of daftness of the whole idea that, you know, God should come as a baby. It's a supreme generosity. Wouldn't it be lovely if our families that get food through the food bank had a surprise blessing that wasn't just the cheapest chocolates in Sainsbury's, you know, but was something lovely or homemade or special, a treat. Maybe that's a little project that you could work with all the churches on. How are we going to treat families this year, not just give them the basics?
There's a very specific question here about Christmas Day, and obviously you mentioned
it's on the 25th of December.
Absolutely. We may all be too exhausted by then. Still, but I mean, you know, midnight mass and the first communion of Christmas, they're big things for most of us.
Yeah.
So, I mean, again, without that crystal ball, are there ways that we can still make that feel special this year?
I think we're looking at, with those things, we're probably looking at this combination of indoor space with digital into the domestic. So many of us, or depending on the weather forecast, you may be brave and bold enough to do an outdoor service, who knows? But I think it is the midnight one. It's a bit chilly by then, but it's a really important time, and not just for regulars, but for irregular regulars as well. So making sure that you work on thinking, how can you get the number of people into your church you could invite in, and how do you make sure others can access it digitally and feel that they're in their home at that moment in some way, taking part in this and valuing that. I mean, another way of doing it is to think to yourself, do you know what? There's an awful lot of very high quality stuff that's broadcast as well, you know, through our radios and through our TVs and so on, television producers. Sometimes just all watching that can be a really good thing as well, you know, for many people. And don't think that that's inferior just because that's what someone does. And Christmas morning, you might be able to do better with the outside space, I would have said, than midnight. And I know that in Wales, from what you've told me, Chris, many of your churches have been working really hard with outdoor space, gathering in the outdoor space. Things like Muddy Church, Forest Church have developed really well. So what would you do on Christmas morning with the outdoor space, and making sure you tell people what's happening and how they can access it? If you can only get as one of my churches that I help with can get in, if you can only get 15 people in your church, you really don't want to be putting up a poster advertising this, because you might well get 45 people coming, but you might want to say, we're going to do 3 services and 15 people can come to each. Here's how you get a ticket. And people are familiar with getting tickets for things.
Yeah, I was talking to somebody last week and they were talking, funny enough, about Christmas morning. That's what sort of prompted me to think about it. And they were saying it just doesn't feel right to give a ticket to somebody to come to church on Christmas Day. But, it's what it is, isn't it?
It might not feel right to us because we're regulars. But one of the most interesting things that emerged from some of the work we were doing around with christening families and Christmas services was the fact that when they were sent an invitation with the date and the time on just to the crib service, so it said, dear baby Jane and your family, please come to our crib service at 3:00 on Christmas Eve. We'd love to see you there. And what happens is they see it as a ticket, an invitation. People outside the church don't any longer understand easily that you can just turn up at things. That we think that, we know that because we're insiders. But people who they get tickets to absolutely everything else now, and at the moment we even get tickets to webinars, don't we? We sort of sign up in advance. There's no cost involved, but we're used to it. So people are booking in to watch live streamed ballet on the telly or whatever's your particular thing. So we need to stop thinking that what we're doing is odd. Does it mean me? Someone says, does it mean me? I can come. So actually, rather than thinking, it makes me feel sad, and perhaps it does in some ways, and we need to hold on to that, reflect on it and be prayerful with it. At the same time, know that by inviting people and telling them they have to book to get a ticket, we might reach some people who would never have thought it meant them that they could come.
You've talked a lot about the kind of the relational aspect of reaching out into the community, one-to-one conversations. J.R. Francis has put a post on there saying that actually inviting 200 people to church with 1 or 2 people speaking, an organ solo, that's not really outreach as we'll understand it. That it's not the most relational thing, isn't it? So again, maybe there's an opportunity this year to do it differently.
I think so. I mean, I think at its best, one of the things that's happened with Zoom Church, for example, is where someone in your congregation has invited another person in, you've already got a relationship and you can then build on it. And there's something about Zoom as well, where everybody's equal on the screen in a way that they aren't in the church building. Even the vicar is the same size and the same box as the newest person. And we're all facing outwards to each other. It's got something interesting going on. So I think that's absolutely right. We might have better ways of getting in touch with people. But really important, if you're doing some sort of live streamed or YouTube pre-recorded service, really make sure that in that service you've got regularly information popping up about where people go next to get more information, more help. That includes, particularly around Christmas, for example, making sure you've included bereavement support helplines, mental health awareness lines. Maybe you've got an action page on your church in where, like the BBC have an action line. Maybe you've got a space where you can put organisations that would give further help and people can go to it. Because there will be questions, there will be feelings around Christmas that we need to make sure we're giving people somewhere to go with those feelings, and we've got, someone, it's like, I've seen a website, I think it's a Church of Scotland, actually, this one, where they have digital baristas, they call them. I love the idea. But basically, they're people who are kind of watching and being there during a service to make contact with people, to just notice who's coming up and say hi to them, and making sure the information is getting put up, where to go. If you've want to know more about the meaning of Christmas, here's where you go next. If you need to talk to someone today, here's where to find who's available. It doesn't mean you've all got to be on a 24-hour phone line, but you point them to somewhere at that point.
Before we started the webinar today, when we were talking, you were talking about recording things now and sort of writing things that will actually go out on December 20th. So again, it's preparation this year, perhaps, isn't it? It's about not leaving everything to that last minute live stream, but actually doing things in advance.
It is, and you might want to start collecting up a few things, really. I feel I'm going tomorrow to film for a service that's being transmitted on the 20th of December. But we're going to a church tomorrow, and I've had to ask them to put a Christmas tree up. I know it's Advent 4, but we all know that in truth, by Advent 4, we'd have our Christmas trappings out. So they've got to put a Christmas tree up. We've got the stable out. We've got the Advent candle. We've got the purple, we've had to set it all for that Sunday so that we can film appropriately and store those things up ready. And you can do that locally as well. Get some things ready rather than thinking you're going to do it all on the 21st of December, do some things as they occur to you. Get different voices doing readings, ready, and you've got them in the bag ready to use when you put the service finally together. It is hard to do the preaching now. That's what I was saying to you, because I can't be sure what the world exactly is going to be like on the 20th of December. But I am sure Christmas will still be happening, so I can go with that.
As you say, a lot of that peripheral stuff can be done in advance, can't it, Sandra? The carols can be recorded, the scenes can be recorded, the readings and things like that.
Yeah, and you could use different voices at this stage. This is the great moment this year to say, do you know, who could read? Who could do a reading at Christmas? And they've got a bit of time to prepare it. Or as I say, our little church, and we're quite a small church, we've got someone who's really come out of themselves in this season, who's organising us all to do these little videos for each day in Advent. Yeah, and they'll be released. So a bit of planning through November means we've got something from December the 1st.
And I think one of the things a lot of people have said through the last 6 months of church, with Zoom particularly, is a number of lay people who have never kind of stood up in church, who would be horrified at the idea of being at front of church, have actually begun to lead lessons, lead prayers, give some testimony and be involved. So again, Christmas is a great opportunity to share the load, isn't it? It
is. And share it with people who may already be involved with church, but also some who've never been involved before. And I love it when I hear about, people's kind of teenagers who are suddenly doing all the Zoom and everything, but they haven't been connected with church for ages, but they're willing to help with something. So not only are our regulars doing more things, but actually some newer people are doing things, which is great. Can I just say something about the digital thing and older people who aren't familiar with digital? Because that is a really important thing. Our regulars, if you like, are often in this older age group, and we may be worried about how digitally savvy they are. The first thing to say is just remember, more of them are digitally savvy than we realise. I sit here, I mentioned Captain Tom, and there's so many others now who are going up on the telly, and they're sitting there and they're actually using social media, and they've got the BBC speaking to them in their homes through their screen. I think they're amazing. So I was talking about someone who's a resident in a care home, and through the help of the care home, the family Skype them in every week. So actually there is more going on than we realised. But the other thing is there is this is national, as in national UK, not national England. There is a thing called the Daily Hope Helpline that's been put together in partnership with Age UK and lots of denominations, I think, which is a free phone number. And if you don't know, just Google Daily Hope Helpline. And Daily Hope is a 24-hour-a-day free phone number. Just use an ordinary phone. And on it, you get a hymn, you get a reflection, you get a prayer. And it's been a lifeline to those, for example, who may be partially sighted and can't use the screen, those who can't access digital at all. They've got a phone line, and that will be producing special content for Christmas. As again, will things like, as I say, don't despise the TV watching, but acknowledge that it's happening. So one of the things we produced for Remembrance and for All Souls was a prayer card that could be sent to someone at home. And it just said, while you're watching the cenotaph, you might like to read this prayer. So we could replicate that for Christmas, to say, actually, we know that the best thing you'll be able to do at Christmas is to watch the BBC's output, whatever it might be. Here's what you could be doing while you're watching it. So you're connecting them with something real rather than just leaving them kind of abandoned, if you like, and being in touch.
Yeah, there are a few kind of responses as you're talking there on the chat, really. Sort of Marion Osborne sort of saying, Francis saying, we must remember the kind of the over 75s who may not be able to either come to have a ticket and come to church, for example, or
Yeah.
on Zoom. But again, we still got all the other ministry of the church, don't we, Sandra? That we can call. We may not be able to visit, we may not be able to go indoors, but we can certainly package, connect with them.
Yeah.
Physical way that we have.
And again, we can use other people. You know, back to the as it happens, you know, in England we've just gone into a sort of lockdown. So one of the things here is, you know, people using this time to do creative things, to make little things. I mean, I'm just going to make a series of mini Christmas cakes, and then the idea is we'll be able to drop them off on people's doorsteps, you know, and say, here's a little mini Christmas cake for you this year, just to bless, you know. And so we can still make that contact. And I really think we shouldn't underestimate the importance of the phone call to people, just to say, hi, how you doing? For many people at Christmas time, it will be not so much whether they've got enough to eat. For some, it will be. But for another lot of people, it will be whether they've heard another voice. And that's where all of us in our church and our wider community can get involved with that, I think, of making contact with people.
Yeah, and again, it's a great way of getting lots more lay people involved, isn't it?
Absolutely, yeah. It really shouldn't all fall on a minister or a licensed minister to do all of this. It's like saying, how are we going to do this? And you can do this too. You know, just it's an ordinary human thing to do, is to give someone a call. And sometimes some of us need a little excuse, like saying we're doing this on behalf of the church. So it's like, it feels like, oh, well, if they don't like it, it isn't me, you know. But, you know, people are sharing some great ideas here, Chris. And all I offer these ideas is jumping off points for people to say, you know, this is a starting point. Just try and think in this way, in this of doing something differently. And people will have their own way of taking that and making it work this year.
You may be in the know, you may not, but Caroline has said, when will the BBC reveal its religious content?
I'm not in the know.
Radio Times.
I only know what the Church of England is revealing. And that's bad enough sometimes, but I don't know when they'll reveal it, but there will be some for sure. And as I say, I just think it's important that we're aware of it. And sometimes unwittingly, we kind of imply that if that's all you can do, that's a shame. But actually, maybe this is the year to say, that's what you do. That's fantastic that you do that. You know?
Absolutely.
And here's your mince pie to eat while you watch.
Final note, there's a question that's been kind of there from the beginning. I didn't want to say I was ignoring it. It was just talking about working alongside other denominations. But I think you've talked a bit about that, about sort of this year more than any other year, getting alongside other community groups and kind of joint effort, joint focus there.
Yes, I think so. Obviously, we all have our own specific things that we're good at, and that's another thing to recognise. You know, who's got the strengths and in the community as well, and we all have our particular traditions. But there may be, particularly some of these newer, more creative things, a way of doing it together. You know, if we want to take Mary and Joseph out on the back of a truck, let's do it together. You know, go and talk to Round Table and say, would you like to have Mary and Joseph instead of Father Christmas this year? You know, because we're just trying to do something that brings meaning. And actually, I think there's a desire to see some meaning, really. You know,
I smiled when you were talking about putting Mary and Joseph on the rugby pitch. If they could bless the Welsh rugby team at the moment, that would be really lovely.
It'd be great, wouldn't it? Mary and Joseph blessing the rugby team.
Absolutely.
I'm sure you could make that happen if you wanted to, Chris.
We'll have a go. And it's been an absolute pleasure.
It's always a delight to talk to you. I hope it's helpful for you as you go into your next webinar. And anyone, I don't mind, anyone who wants to contact us and directly can do that, and we'll share what we can, you know, and encourage you.
Absolutely. A couple of people have said, you know, they've missed bits and bobs. As I said, it's been recorded, so go back onto the website.
And I'll share these slides with you as well.
That'll be brilliant. Okay, so we'll make sure that when we put the webinar up onto the site that we have those as well. That'll be great, Sandra. Just a reminder, everybody, that we've got the second of our Christmas webinars next week. Veronica can just pop that up. So this is called Christmas Reimagined, and it's going to be very practically based. So contributors next week. So Matthew Batten will be talking about Advent. Bishop Andy John will be talking about the Church in Wales initiative for 2020, which is called Darkness to Light. Sue will be talking about Christingle, one of the great Christmas services, of course. Paulette Gower about community nativity. Sally Humble-Jackson from the Christmas Story will again be bringing some resources along and sharing some ideas about how to do the nativity and community outreach. Di Walbridge, many of you will know from the Bible Society, lots of resources every Christmas that come from Di. And Jane Natras, who's from Newcastle, and she's going to be talking very practically about what Christmas Eve and Christmas Day might look like for some of us this year. So lots of practical help and advice as well. If you're not registered, just go onto the St. Padans website and register for that. Sandra, thank you once again, and thank you.
I read reimagined as a strange German word at first glance. It was very peculiar.
You thought it was spelt in Welsh?
Yeah, I didn't know what I thought it was, but then I realised it was just reimagined.
I think we're all reimagining Christmas, but as you've said, Sandra, it needn't be a poorer one. It can be a really exciting.
It'd be a rich one, and that's what we're praying, that more people will touch the great truth, this year.
Absolutely. Take care, everybody. Hope to see you.
God bless. Bye.
Thank you. Bye now.